The question and answer portion. Are there any questions, comments, critiques, arguments, additions?
Do you think that the U.S. is apprehensive to go to war in Syria and Iran because they know that potentially it would be a bankrupt move, both politically and economically?
Well, so here's the thing. It's not so much about what anyone wants. World War I, that is, I mean, at the risk of sounding dogmatic, that is the perennial example that we need to look at. No one in World War I wanted a mass slaughter of millions of people and, at that time, millions of dollars in production just thrown away. It's not about what any individual wants. It's about where the system leads it. The U.S. needs to establish security in the region. The U.S. is certainly apprehensive about taking on Syria with Russian shipping cruise missiles, you know, anti-ship cruise missiles, and they don't want to do it. But if it, you know, it stabilizes their position, they may have to. But and you know, certainly they don't want to tango with Chinese fighter jets over Iran. But they may have to in order to keep stability in Israel, Iraq. Right? I mean, Iraq is now gravitating towards becoming an Iranian satellite. In order to keep Iraq from doing that, would they go to war with Iran? I don't know. I hope not, but it certainly looks like they might. And then, but also it comes in stages. There is no like evil tower where the elites, you know, Mr. Burns it up and decide how our fates are going to be decided. It's not so simple. There are different agendas in the working class. The Republicans and obviously there are different agendas in the working class, but there are also agendas in the different agendas. I misspoke there in the capitalist class. And the Republicans and the Democrats do represent differences, but they're differences in tactics, right? In plans, not differences in goals. And so, you know. One of the big things that people attempted to blackmail me with was, well, if you vote for McCain, we'll go to war with Iran, right? And that's why they voted for Obama, because he's going to get us out of the wars and blah 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 blah. But you'll notice the structural forces have pushed him that he not only has not gotten us out of Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, we're on the verge of getting thrown out of Iraq, but that's hardly the same. But now we have this nice new war in Libya, and provocative threatening against Iran. And you'll notice there was the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, I want to say, which says that American citizens on American soil can be held indefinitely without trial or are given being subject to military tribunal. 9/11 was 10 years ago, right? What's the big terrorist attack that has happened recently? None. Occupy Wall Street, I guess. Peaceful protesters, a couple broken windows. Why pass this act? Why? Where's the sense in it? Where's the problem? Where's the cause? Well, if you look on the surface, there is no reason, there is no cause. But if you expect to be fighting a war with Russia and China, with a discontented local population, which hopefully is filled with communists, you know, hindering your war effort, maybe funded, hopefully, cross your fingers, by China or whomever. What kind of laws do you need in place? What kind of social tenor and social tone do you want? It's worth looking at where they're going, both in immigration and in homeland security. And just as a side note, right, they gave away the game. If there's a homeland, then there are colonies, right? So this is literally a defense of the homeland so that the colonization and imperialism can continue. So, short answer, I'd prefer that they not go to war with Russia and China, just because, again, every thinking person who has any shred of humanity is not going to want to see that wholesale slaughter. But in the most ruthless, cynical, and practical way, it's worth noting that revolutionary upsurges usually come after world wars. And I don't think world capitalism can survive another one. So I guess that's the silver or red lining to that. But do you have any thoughts of that response?
That was perfect. Great response.
Do you guys want to go around the room and maybe just ask a question or give thoughts or critiques? Okay, well, we'll start on this side and then we'll get to you last. And you can pass, it's not forced. Kai, you have anything? Steve?
So the gist of the argument is that the Occupy movement itself is not revolutionary in character, and it is best to be a part of the popular movement in order to push masses towards a more radical consciousness, but to be prepared in the meantime for something different, something bigger, that will not be Occupy and will be outside.
Yeah.
But don't shun Occupy, use it as a valuable meeting place, networking tool, etc.
Yeah, and again, if we go into it conscious, I mean, this is something really important. Communists hated Students for a Democratic Society. The Communist Party USA basically denounced it, a bunch of liberal, bourgeois, whiny kids, middle-class kids who are living off their parents and blah, 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 blah. That is exactly the attitude we need to not have. But also, we have an advantage. If we analyze the class, assuming I'm right, I mean, I'd like to see other class analysis of Occupy Wall Street. I mean, this is just a sketch by itself. I mean, I'd have to go through and show the decline of imperial super profits and its distribution to Americans. I mean, it's a lot of actual research, hard research that would need to be done. But we have two advantages. If this analysis of Occupy Wall Street is correct, then one, when we enter the movement, we have a better understanding of it, which means it's easier for us to operate in it. Because we understand the motivations, the class characteristics of people in it. You know, there's sort of class interests, where those will lead, where there will be conflicts, etc., etc. So that's one. It helps us with leadership. The second is it helps us keep perspective. You know, the defeat of Occupy, the clearing out of Zuccotti Park, the clearing out of Pioneer Park, for that matter. Instead of being this awful, demoralizing event where the revolution is basically beaten out of the streets by cops and tear gas, we say, well, you know, that sucks. Obviously, we'd rather have it there than not there. But it's just a step, right? So these small step back, or these small steps back are not disheartening because we recognize their true character. So that's two. Well, and also a third thing is, with the SDS, because the Communist Party USA completely shunned it, and that was the main communist force, it grew up in bourgeois or petty bourgeois leadership.
Sure.
And so people weren't exposed to socialism or communism or that sort of thing, usually until the mid-60s. Right? So there was a big gap of wasted years. Now, I'm not saying if communists had joined it for the beginning, then it would have become the revolution. But it would have, that sort of socialist, revolutionary, and communist participation would have really driven things, could have driven things. I mean, we don't know its history. And,
Sure.
but it really could have driven things in an even more radical direction, which still ended up pretty radical, of people, you know, supporting the Black Panther Party and, you know, the Weather Underground. I mean, how much more radical would have people been if they would have been there on the ground floor day one?
Sure. But I mean, yeah, I think you are talking about a difference in aims between the Black Panther Party, the SDS, Weather Underground, and a massive anti-imperialist movement. I think there should be.
Well,
the Black Panther Party had the civil rights movement to rally behind. Weather Underground had really nothing to rally behind. SDS, student union consciousness, etc. I mean, an anti-imperialist. I mean, I'm all for it. I'm just trying to better understand your position. It seems. What are the characteristics of a movement that you're looking to monopolize with that sort of consciousness? Is it precisely something like the Occupy movement?
yeah, well, and again, here's something to keep in mind, right? I think you're wrong if you say that the Black Panther Party was a radical anti-imperialist party.
Sure, but what I'm saying is that it had a pedestal to defend itself internally from the sorts of legislation you're talking about. The civil rights movement did a lot to prop up the Black Panther Party. Without the Civil Rights Movement, you get a much more aggressive CIA. You get a much more aggressive FBI. You get a lot less public support.
Well, I think that I'm having some confusion on exactly what you mean by propping up. Because, I mean, Martin Luther King Jr.'s COINTELPRO file is still classified and hugely redacted. And so the imperialists then, as the imperialists now, are going to continue to react to squash this and basically counterinsurgency, even against peaceful movements. But it's not necessarily cause or effect, because this is what I hear you saying. There was a cause, which was the civil rights movement, and then there was effect, which was the Black Panther Party movement could grow out of it.
I guess what I'm thinking is more, there was a mainstream, sort of appropriate cause.
Sure.
That much more radical groups used to legitimize their struggle in the public eye.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that's sort of like what STS was to the Weather Underground.
In the beginning.
In the beginning,
yeah.
right. But
and I'm asking, is that kind of how you're seeing
Occupy Wall Street?
Occupy Wall Street.
Right. Occupy Wall Street is this relatively mainstream mass movement, not a mass organization, but a mass movement, in which organizing can be done. Now the question, of course, becomes, well, what kind of organizing? Well, absolutely vital that any organizing we do be anti-imperialist. And that means when we're talking about supporting unions, when we're talking about women's rights, when we're talking about students' rights, like we could also say, like, let me give you a really good example of the difference between anti-imperialism and social fascism. Full education rights for all. Okay, what's the problem with that slogan? Well, nothing necessarily. But also the question becomes, well, does all include undocumented students? And we need to stridently say, yes, it does. Because if I went down to Occupy Wall Street, or Occupy SLC, I could say, you know, full payment for students, full education for all. And it would be, everyone, yeah, that sounds great. And they're like, and that's why we need to repeal these anti-immigrant education bills that say that they're not, you know, that they don't get, what's the term, residency. They'd be like, well, no, they're not part of this. Right? I mean, I've been in literal conversations like that in Occupy SLC, or SLC, one C. So that sort of imperialism always sneaks it can sneak its way through, because there's a class basis. So when people understand full reproductive rights, full medical rights for women, including undocumented women. And no, you don't have to show your driver's license. No, you don't have to show your place of residence, your phone number. Full reproductive rights means full reproductive rights for everyone. Is that a harder line? Yes. In a practical sense, should we use the full reproductive rights? Maybe so. Maybe so. Like, that might be a pragmatic way to go. But when we're doing the nitty-gritty work, we need to make sure that it's clear. What we're talking about with full reproductive rights is for all women, regardless of citizenship status. Just for an example.
No, I understand. That makes sense. I'm in your position. I like.
Do you have some ruthless critique on why I'm...
No, I mean, no. Okay. No, I like it. Yeah, at first you had me with the Wall Street bashing, and then when you explained exactly why, I mean, I feel incredibly similar. So I don't have any major critiques, but I don't want everyone to pass, so I'll keep trying to think of things.
Okay, we'll come back to you why I'm wrong. Brett, do you have anything else that you want? Questions, comments, critiques, arguments?
Nothing other than the imminent Third World War comment I made.
I guess technically fourth. Cold War. Vaughn?
Well, I really liked that, because something I just really didn't think of, even though I guess it's fairly simple, is, you know, they were really attacking the banks, but really not the core of imperialism, which I think is really important now. I kind of missed, because I had a lot of problems with Occupy, but I think that is one that I missed, and I think I agree with the biggest problem with it. And then I guess I would have a couple questions. If there were another, I agree we're on the brink of another world war, and I think, obviously that's how the U.S. became to be a superpower. So I wonder if it's possible that another country could become a superpower from that. And then also my second question, if your theory is correct that, there isn't a superpower anymore and they're not able to have these super profits and not be able to pay, would the bourgeois be absorbed into the working class, or would there be this greater divide into the super rich and the poor?
Two really good questions. As for no other superpower arising, I mean, it's theoretically possible. I mean, it could be China, I guess, maybe. But you have to keep in mind, China has a huge economy, massive economy, but it also has a very small population base, a relatively small per capita economy. And so a lot of Chinese people live in incredibly backward conditions. Certainly, I find a lot of aspects of China's current economy very troubling, but in some respects there isn't enough development to go around, more or less. I mean, it's a really complicated issue, and they're certainly trying their best. Recently, China just rose their poverty line standards and included, another 130 million people in poverty, which is actually a good thing, by the way, because when you raise your poverty standards, your poverty line, that means that everyone below that poverty line gets poverty aid. I'm sure all of you, when you think about it, really wish the U.S. would raise its poverty line so that a lot more people could qualify for it. So, I mean, there's aspects like that. But, where's China's Navy? Nowhere. Does China really have an offensive military? It's got a big land force and it's got a relatively good air force. But unless they're invading India or Russia or, Afghanistan, there's not a lot of places their army can get to. They just don't have that. They don't have that sort of imperial infrastructure that Britain had 200 years ago of a massive navy, or that the United States has now with these air bases everywhere and military bases everywhere, and the ability to transport in that sense, and a massive navy. So I don't see that happening. It might, in which case it'll be China, which will probably be beneficial for the world. But I don't see it happening. I think we are entering the twilight of superpowers, and we'll either enter socialism at the risk of sounding like those guys, socialism or barbarism. Those are sort of the choices in front of us. And then the second is, we're already seeing it. The divide between rich and poor is getting bigger. And what do the Occupy Wall Street people by and large say? It's the diminishing middle class. What do the Tea Party say? We're losing the middle class. Well, I'm saying no, what you're really losing is super profits. I'm not particularly sad about that. I mean, it puts us in a dangerous situation, as fascism always is. But yeah, I think the bourgeois will not be absorbed in the working class. It might reduce itself down to 200-300 families worldwide, and it will just be rich as hell and have us all living in Somalia-style starvation, and they'd still be fine with that. So I don't see any form of class collaboration or disintegration of the bourgeoisie unless they're disintegrated figuratively, not literally. So.
The only real thing that I can come up with is, from listening to your entire speech, is it seems like the Occupy movement is, as you said, a stepping stone. I agree with what you said, and in my eyes, it's, and partly what I feel what you said, is it's more as a networking, trying to find and turn out the people who are going to actually do the work, rather than just say, here's my issue, then stop fighting for what they say they believe in the second they get the money. Because that's really what Occupy is I see it as based off more money than, as you said, the actual social conditions behind it. So would you say that its golden lining here would be that it's actually bringing people together where we can network ideas?
Well, okay, so, I mean, not to be too critical of that, I want to be clear, I'm a Marxist. So for me, it's about class analysis. And so I don't have like an anarchist perspective or a liberal perspective in which it's the individual that's central. I mean, we're all individuals, and obviously we have different capacities, and it's better for us to have more individuals together than less individuals together. But a bunch of individuals coming together doesn't ever fundamentally change anything, which is why we need mass organizations. Is the organization, even though it's just formal, right? It's just an abstract idea. It's so much more than any individuals.
This is true.
Like, think of an army.
Yeah.
An army is a very powerful social force, and what you'll notice is it's on its face, it's all a bunch of individuals with guns, right? But you'll notice an army with organization is much stronger than just a bunch of individuals with guns, because there is that concept.
Organization, definitely.
Exactly. So it is beneficial that Occupy Wall Street is bringing people together, but it needs to turn into mass organizations.
Okay.
But I mean, that's good. There's nothing wrong with more people being together than less.
Yeah.
But that's probably its least, I think, important aspect. I mean, we've all got Facebook. I'm friends with communists all over the United States and what have you, and the world.
Yeah.
More is it's changing the sort of social dynamics because of the disintegration of super profits and the labor aristocracy, right? The bought-off working class. It's becoming more and more acceptable to question. It's becoming, and not just like individuals are now questioning, but socially. There's a recognition that there is a social problem and a social instability, rather than just like, I mean, it's still, there are aspects of that, rather than it's just individual, like, oh, there's some bad guys on the top who did some dick moves, right? It's becoming, wow, this is really messed up, and it's a social problem. There's something systemically wrong.
Yeah.
That's one. Two, a lot of myths are being broken. This next generation is, or I guess this current generation, is not going to have any myths about officer friendly.
I agree.
Right? That was a big thing. I mean, there are still people who are like, oh, the cops are part of the 99%, but, you know, they shot me in the face with tear gas canister. No, no one is saying that.
They're on it's one side or the other.
Yeah, I mean, there are some people who are like in small towns that haven't been beaten. I mean, here in Occupy SLC, I mean, certainly it was a psychologically traumatic thing to see, you know, the tents like bulldoze and what have you. But like nobody was pepper spray.
Exactly. You weren't getting any real. Sorry, I can't think of the word.
Repression.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, but here's the thing: is plenty of people are getting an education in police brutality. Plenty of people are getting an education in what this system and what their freedoms really mean. That's incredibly valuable. In addition, the social base, I mean, this is going to sound really bad. You know, well, I'm going to say it because I think it's true. I don't want it to happen now. I want it to happen in a couple years. Well, I mean, it might happen this year, given the way of things. I'm very excited for the disintegration of Occupy Wall Street. And here's why. Because when Occupy Wall Street disintegrates, people are going to understand through that education of practice, which is why I don't want it to disintegrate now. What organizing works, what organizing doesn't work, who are their friends, who are their enemies, what can we do, what can we not do, what tactics may work for a while but are insufficient, and what new tactics are we going to be willing and able to try. That is something that I'm very interested to see. And out of that, we'll see all sorts of just radical, I think, hopefully, radical new tactics, radical new organizations. And that, I think, will probably be the ultimate benefit for Occupy Wall Street, is that education in the streets that people are getting.
That makes a lot of sense.
So, all right, any other
Good question.
questions, critiques, comments? You got a final up yours for me?
You always think I'm going to be super critical.
You did say you were working on one.
No, I mean, I was working on questions to keep conversation going, but I mean, I think it's been good. To defend the Occupy movement in a small capacity, I think it was telling that they didn't go occupy Washington. They didn't occupy business, or I mean, they didn't occupy civic centers and political buildings. They occupied a financial sector. I think that is
That's a big step.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing, and a positive step in the right direction. But also, I think the idea that this isn't a few bad apples, you kind of stated, this is sort of obvious. I think that's almost an overstatement for the good majority of the people involved. And the people that I've been able to talk to. I wasn't at Occupy SLC, but just watching documentaries, talking with my friends back east that have dealt with it, my general experience has been, we're sick of the system, but like the system, we're sick of what's going on, we're not sick of the system. And I think the lessons of, it's obviously not just a few bad apples, it's obviously systemic. I think that's a lesson that's being learned by this generation, not a lesson that we can expect people to account for now.
Sure.
I think it's in the process.
Yeah, and also, I mean, context matters. By and large, the people that occupy Wall Street, from what I've heard, numerous reports, are primarily white.
Males.
White and males. The people primarily in Boston, it's actually a mix, from what I hear.
It's more so. That's right.
More so. It's a little more militant, but it's more so. But I mean, that's what I'm saying, is it's more so, it's mixed. It's a little more mixed. It's not just white dudes.
Or just intellectuals, students.
Yeah, and it's a little more militant. And then you have Oakland, which is by and large probably the least white Occupy in the major Occupy in the entire country. And what are they doing? Right?
Strikes.
Calling general strikes, having near riots all over the place. So I mean, it's a diversity, of context, and so I certainly recognize that. When was the last time? I'm not saying that they were necessarily successful in every way, but let's look back in American history. When was the last time you heard about a call for a general strike? I mean, whether it happened or not, when was the last time you heard general strike becoming a popular term and a popular tactic?
Almost never.
This is it in my lifetime.
There you go.
There was the boycott of Freedom Fries. That was a big one in my life.
Yeah.
But by no means a general strike.
Yeah, by no means.
So.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a big shift. Americans have been labor aristocrats, so where was the realm of economic or political economy? In consumption.
Absolutely.
Where is it moving to? Realm of production. All positive.
So quick, just before we get off, would you talk about quickly the importance that you see specifically in a couple points of the U.S. military in propping up capital? Because the U.S. military is still going to support the Barclays, the largest capitalist corporation in the world right now, regardless of whether they're American or not, because it's systemically in their interest. And you talked about that, but could you just hit, as transnational corporations begin to transcend, and already have for years, transcended boundaries, this is nothing new, Lenin tells us this in the early 20s, but could you just talk quickly to the importance of the United States military to world capitalism?
One word: stability. Right now, it looks as though American troops are willing to go fight and die for Barclays. And that's true to a certain extent. And here's why it's true. Because Barclays owns a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
If you're fighting for capitalism anywhere in the world, odds are that the child corporation of Barclays is one of the corporations in that area. But here's the thing, that's a little different than if, I don't know if the UK would ever make a split with the United States. I mean, there's a lot of shared racism there towards the rest of the world that I don't know that they'd ever get rid of. But if the US were to have a break, they would invade areas to make sure the capital was safe, but wouldn't you know it, probably the Barclays holdings would probably get nationalized. Or, let me give you a clear example. The United States defends all sorts of French and German interests all over the globe. Libya is a good example. But also, that shows the weakening of the U.S. position. What happened in Iraq? U.S. invaded Iraq, said you need to come with us. Libya and Germany said you can go to hell. U.S. said, well, then guess what? You're not getting any of the reconstruction contracts. And Germany and France were basically excluded from Iraq for what? 5 years?
Something like that.
8 years? That's how things go when the imperialist powers fight. Now the US military can defend Barclays because it's clear that however big Barclays is, the UK is a junior partner of imperialism.
Sure.
So that's the importance of the US military. It's stability. But less and less, because all the imperialists can have a heyday because the US provides world stability. But less and less, the US is able to provide world stability. So more and more, these other imperialists are going to have to start looking after their own interests. It's worth noting, right? What happened in Libya? Instead of seeing that as a period of great cooperation, it's a weakening of American hegemony. And, you know, if the United States, previously the United States could have told Germany, guess what? You're going to pay the money to Greece to bail them out so we can have stability to the world. If the US said that, Germany said, okay, but you also need to start working on your debt. Right? And so now that stability is disintegrating. And so more and more, the US military is not going to be a force for stability, but will rather be the biggest imperialist in the inter-imperialist wars. At least that's my view. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it sounds about right. I mean, I think that the sessions between South America are going to be huge in how they respond to global trading. And I think that will tell a lot. But I think you need, not you as in one needs some sort of larger resistance to U.S. imperialism that I don't know will simply be put up by sort of you owe us, we owe you. I think we're open to more inflation, more loans, more poverty, more disparity.
Yeah. And let me be clear. I view Occupy Wall Street as a phenomenon based on crises of the imperialist system because it's by and large a first world phenomenon. I mean, sure, there are Occupy Wall Streets elsewhere.
No, sure, I get you.
Yeah, but it's by and large a first world phenomenon. By no means don't let this discussion make it sound as though I'm pessimistic. Latin America did not liberate itself. I mean, it's not completely liberated, so we shouldn't over-exaggerate. But Latin America did not move to national governments through any inter-imperialist conflict.
Sure.
They did it themselves through resistance. Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya are not draining the United States because there's a lot of imperialism supporting them behind that. I mean,
Sure.
maybe Iran and Iraq, but that's small potatoes compared to the American military. And yet the U.S. is still being thrown out. All over India, the Maoists are gaining ground, and they're not being funded by the Chinese. They're not being funded by Russia. They're doing it themselves. So on a world scale, the working class are getting stronger and doing better. So I hope that I mean, it wasn't clear because that's not what I was really talking about. But that's where the wider resistance comes.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I do. I just think, I don't know, I guess I'm not as optimistic in the sort of, it's coming quick, watch out. I feel that it has to be dealt that death blow. It's not going to come with the current trajectory unless a lot more happens.
Yeah, as Mao said, the enemy will not fall unless you strike them.
Sure.
What?
I said exactly.
Yeah, if we don't do anything, or if we wait for the system to destroy itself, we won't get a revolution, we'll get fascism. Just open, unrepentant fascism. Our resistance now that it's not so clear, it's not so obvious, is essential because now is the time in which we can build that framework and those structures and those organizations for resistance. 10 years, I think it's coming in like 10 years, but, and I'm happy to be wrong if it comes later. I'm not happy to be wrong if it comes sooner. But if we start doing the organizing efforts we need and building that wider resistance, as you said, in 10 years when it's arriving, we won't have a shot.
Sure.
So, and that's why this is what I'm including as my most pressing. Any other questions, comments? All right, give him a hand.